Okay, joining me now with more on our top story about those 5 Americans released from Iran is the host of this broadcast, Andrea Mitchell, who just got out of a meeting with Iran's president at the UN. Andrea, thank you for rushing out after that very important meeting that you had with President Raisi. Just tell us what you're able to about what he had to say about the prisoner exchange.
Well, that was what was so fascinating about this. I've been to many of these sessions at the United Nations where he holds an off-the-record meeting with journalists and editors, a small group of 10 or 15 of us, and it's always off the record. We can't report it. Occasionally we can get one sentence or two out of it. I said at the opening we were asked to ask our questions first, and then he would give the answers. So it was a list of questions from us and then a list of answers, so no follow-up to anything that he said. And I said, can we, given the news of today, have at least some comment about the release of the prisoners? And at the end of an hour, he said he wanted, well, right away, he said, although they had told us it was off the record, you understand this so well. He then said, but we want you to disseminate this to your readers and viewers and to the larger community. So at the end, he repeated that. And so we waited until we got the all clear that this is all on the record, which has never happened before. Of course, he had that fascinating interview just a week ago in Tehran with Lester Holt, of course, our anchor and managing editor of Nightly News. And I also asked him to clarify what he had said to Lester, that the humanitarian aid that was going to be, that the $6 billion of their oil money would be used for now that it has been deposited in Qatar, that would be used for anything they wanted. And he repeated that. He repeated it would be used for the needs of Iran. But interestingly, what he said, that he thought that the prisoner exchange should be better framed as a humanitarian gesture involving the release of 5 Iranians unjustly held in the United States. Now, we know now and can report that those 5 include 3 who may well stay in the U.S. because of ties here. They were all accused of nonviolent crimes, sanctions, and things of the like. So that prisoner exchange has now taken place. As you know, the Americans are on their way back. The $6 billion has been deposited. And then he went on and accused the U.S. and the Europeans of meddling and inciting the riots, the protests. And he said that the prisoner exchange, interestingly, Ryan, was delayed much longer than it would have been if we, the United States, had not meddled, of course, in what the U.S. has said is a grassroots protest, large-scale protest, just a year ago that started with the death of Mahsa Amini, as you know, in custody. So there was a lot of their point of view, but I'll be coming back to the studio and giving more reporting on this, but basically on the prisoner exchange, he said that it was a humanitarian gesture. He also said that he thought that this could lead to other collaborative cooperation with countries that wanted to be collaborative and cooperate. There was a lot more on Iran, possibly negotiating with Saudi Arabia and other Persian Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia negotiating with Israel, which he calls the Zionist state, which is still, something that he will not even deal with. But a lot about the women, the protests, and the prisoner exchange, and the nuclear agreement.
And Andrea, first of all, fascinating reporting as always, but I'm interested, you talk about his opening this up to more diplomatic relations with other countries in the Middle East. Did he talk at all about whether or not this will open more diplomatic relations with the United States as well? Obviously, the two countries have had somewhat of a conflictual relationship, especially after President Trump pulled out of that Iran nuclear deal. What is the status of the relationship between the United States and Iran in the wake of this prisoner swap?
Well, even U.S. officials have said for the past 6 months there have been no Iranian attacks in Syria against U.S. forces, and for the past 12 to 13 months, no attacks against U.S. forces in Iraq. So there has been relative calm. There has been a cessation of incidents against tankers, U.S. and other tankers, and that the U.S. is still going to sanction Iran, according to the officials we spoke to last night. U.S. officials briefing us late last night on all of this, which we were able to report this morning once the Americans were out. So that is going to be a very delicate balancing act. We'll see how aggressive he is in his speech when he goes before the General Assembly right here at the United Nations tomorrow. But he did say that there were ways that there could be cooperation, and he was appealing to us to not tell what he said were 36,000 lies that were reported about the women's protests in the first 48 days of those protests. So they view everything that we were reporting last year as being quote unquote lies. There's a lot of propaganda today. There always is. We are adversaries, as defined by the U.S. But from my interpretation, having covered so many of these, he was looking for a way forward and also saying so on the nuclear agreement. But as you know, they're the ones, well, let me just say this. He said there was an absence of faith and of confidence in the United States, of trust, because we and the Europeans, he said, got out of the nuclear agreement, we first. And that is undeniable. The Trump administration canceled this multilateral, multi-nation agreement. It was all of the UN 5 permanent members, the European Union, and the United States. And the U.S. administration dropped out of it for at least a year or two. The Iranians abided by it. He said that they had never broken it, but what they have done is, because the U.S. broke the agreement, they have begun enriching nuclear fuel at a much higher rate. Up to 60%, 90% would be weapons grade. Secretary Blinken has told us they're only weeks away if they continued at this pace of having enough for one weapon. Not a missile to deliver, but one weapon. So that is still very much in play.